Let's turn to this. It's been 60 full years since diplomatic ties were set up for China and India. On Wednesday, Chinese Premier Wen Jiabao landed in New Delhi for his three-day visit aimed at strengthening their economic and strategic relationship. But over those past 6 decades, there have also been disputes and even wars between these neighbours. A level of distrust still remains, as we see in this report.
Premier Wen Jiabao's three-day visit to India was his first in 5 years. He was accompanied by more than 400 Chinese business leaders, underscoring the country's growing commercial ties. Beijing and New Delhi are keen to highlight economic interdependence. Bilateral trade is expected to hit $60 billion this year, making China India's largest trading partner. The two countries are also entwined by their rising global clout. Both have stood together to resist Western demands in world trade and climate change talks. During the visit, Premier Wen Jiabao said China supports India's desire to play a bigger role in the UN Security Council.
As a fast-growing big country with over 1 billion people, India should and can play an increasingly important role in international affairs.
But disputes remain. The balance of trade is heavily in China's favor. India's trade deficit with China is between $17 and $18 billion. And over 70% of India's exports to China are raw materials. There's also a long-standing border dispute. Despite 14 rounds of talks in the last 29 years, China and India cannot agree on where to draw the line in the Himalayan territory between the two countries. India worries about China's close relationship with Pakistan, its longtime foe. And China worries about India's recent nuclear deal with the U.S. Ahead of Wen's visit to New Delhi, China's ambassador to India said the two countries faced daunting challenges.
I'm of the view that China and India relations is very fragile and easy to be damaged and difficult to repair.
No doubt, as the world's two most populous nations, China and India, have important bilateral ties. The challenge is whether the emerging giants can work together and not become rivals for power and influence.
Well, to talk about the China-India relationship, we have to, of course, bring you a panel of guests from China and India, but also from the United States. Let's turn around to the big screen to see who's here with us. And delighted on the left, Mohan Goswami, the chairman of the Center for Policy Alternatives over in New Delhi. Thank you very much. Professor Rong Ying, deputy director at the China Institute of International Studies here in Beijing. And last but very much not least, Dr. Richard White, senior fellow at the Hudson Institute over in Washington. Gentlemen, thank you very much. Let's start off with this. Let's ask first, Mohan, the China-India relationship in terms of trade has performed, it's outstripped any kind of expectations and targets that were set 5 years ago when Wen Jiabao was last in Delhi. But is this relationship purely a trade one?
Well, it's increasingly a trade relationship because, we have many outstanding political disputes which haven't been resolved, but we also have certain commonalities in approach on international forum, as we saw in Copenhagen and often in G20. So it's a bit of both, as relationship between two large countries should be. And increasingly business is important because both countries are growing at a very fast pace. We see no reason why business shouldn't be important.
Let's go to Rong Ying for a look at this, because according to a World Bank forecast, India is poised to outpace China in the next year to become the world's fastest growing economy. My question is this: will a rising India or an even further rising India make everyone here in China a little bit nervous?
Well, the comparison is always interesting. I mean, particularly between the two neighbors who are rising simultaneously, India and China, as we have seen, not only in the academic circle but also for the public media. And there are, of course, understood that a lot of speculations that sooner or later India is going to catch up with China, and also, to take over the sort of the position of China being the largest and the fastest economy. But for me, I think the point is not who comes first or comes second, because there's no one going to give them a gold medal for that. The most important thing is that the benefits they are going to bring to the public, being the two countries, the largest population, and more importantly, I guess it will be what kind of contributions or public goods they are going to bring for the region and for the world. So the discussion or the debate of who comes first and second is important, but not the most important thing.
But competition on a regional and ever more on a global scale is inevitable. Richard, over there in Washington, tell us about your opinion from a third-party standpoint. With this competition, how are India and China going to be best positioned to solve any existing or new conflicts?
Well, as in most relationships, there's an admixture of competition and cooperation. So the areas of competition are fairly well known. There's various border disputes. There's concerns about trade imbalance. There's concerns about geopolitical encirclement on both parts, parts of both, Beijing and Islamabad and New Delhi because of what's happening in Pakistan or to China's east. But there are elements of cooperation. They can gain mutual benefits from trade. They have an interest in promoting regional stability beyond their borders as well as close there at hand. And globally, they've been aligned in some of the climate change debates. And so they'll just have, like most relationships, like the U.S. relationship with China, for example, it's going to be a question of managing elements of competition and encouraging elements of cooperation over time.
Well, as you said, Mohan, it's not just about trade, but more in the United States and India have been cementing their strong relationship with a new nuclear deal. Is China right to feel a bit uncomfortable about that part? And is India and is Washington working together to placate Beijing to some extent at least?
No, I think that's
I really would...
let's go first to Mohan and then we'll cross over to Richard. Yeah. Mohan?
Yeah, it's a civilian... I think it's an incorrect inference saying that it is aimed at China, because it is a civilian nuclear deal. It's mostly about nuclear power and nuclear energy. It's not about making nuclear weapons. So, I don't see any reason why China should be concerned. India has a serious energy problem, and nuclear power is expected to meet that gap. And the US has the technology, and the technology has been denied to us earlier because of the energy restrictions. And I think that we have overcome now. And we have had a good record on proliferation. We have not exported nuclear technology to anybody, let alone countries like North Korea, Pakistan, and Iran. So, I don't see why China should think that this is aimed against it.
Apologies, Richard, there's a bit of time delay with our satellite, but please add to that.
Well, I think that it was in the Bush administration, there were some people who wanted to use China as a de facto ally, India as a de facto ally against China, and they thought that the nuclear deal could help promote that. But the Indians made it quite clear early on that that was not something they were eager to participate in. And so more now, if there's that kind of thinking, it's more as a potential hedge down the road, but there's no active element to use India to counter China in Washington, at least under the Obama administration at present.
Rohini, let me ask you about this.
I think
Rohini, let me ask you quickly here in our studio. The Indian Foreign Secretary, who I spoke to earlier this year, really pushed a message of a UN Security Council seat for India in any UN reform. But Premier Windialba has come out this week to offer his own support. How does that change the dynamics in this two-way relationship?
I think China understands very well the sort of aspiration and the desire of India to play a bigger role on international issues, and including the UN Security Council. And China has made it very clear, I think, as early as in 2008, when the Prime Minister Manmohan Singh visited China, and they shared the vision. And then in this year, during the visit, I think the President Patil to China, and China again, I reiterated its position that we understand, China understands and support that desire. and would like to have talks with India. And recently, I think in Wuhan, the trilateral meetings of the three ministers, if you look at the statement again, China and Russia, made the point that they would like to, given the fact that India is taking over the sort of member of non-permanent member of the Security Council starting January the 1st, and they are looking forward to work with India in the UN Security Council. So I guess that the Security Council issue, of course, is a complicated issue, and China has made clear the position that it supports the expansion of the representation of the developing countries, and India being, I guess, personally, as the largest developing country, at least one of them that stand a very good chance. So I think the position of China on India's UN Security Council candidature is clear, and it has been also, I think, should be well understood by the India as well.
Mohan, so many people, when they speak of China and India, also speak of distrust and misunderstandings. Just let's take away the government-to-government level. When we talk about people-to-people level, what does the average person, say, for example, in Delhi, where you live, what does that person think of China?
Well, you know, I saw a poll yesterday which shows that the majority of people in India mistrust China. And I'm sure it's similar. I've seen polls indicating the same in China. So I think there's a lot of ground to be covered. I think on a government-to-government basis, I think there is a better understanding, and I think the relationship is entering a more mature plane. So, you know, both governments have a lot to do. Both governments have a lot of work to do. Media in both countries have a lot of work to do. We have a lot of irresponsible commentaries, both in China and in India, which vitiate the atmosphere. I think we've got some hard work to do.
Richard, I want to finish off with you. I want to ask you, if there is mistrust from the average Indian about China, what can one do to overcome that? And particularly, is it in the interest of the United States to try and help move this relationship forward?
Actually, the polling that I've seen shows that the Indians, there's not that much on the average Indian part distrust of China. At least that's strongly felt. They're much more concerned maybe about some economic issues, but not general distrust. The U.S., of course, has mixed interests involved. They don't want to see a war between India and China or something that would be very disruptive to the global security or global economic interests. But having sources of tension persist between India and China can be seen as useful insofar as it cautions China about behaving aggressively in other fronts of more concern. For example, against Japan at the islands, or Vietnam in the South China Sea, or Taiwan. So the U.S., although I'm certain public will say it wants to help promote good ties, this probably has mixed feelings and likes the current state of a decent relationship, but nothing too close.
So Rongying and Mohan, one quick word each on how do you move forward?
I guess the two sides, I agree with Mohan that not only the government but also the public has a lot of work to do. And first and foremost, I think mutual understanding has been strengthened despite the fact that the two countries are neighbors. There are quite a large sort of area, and particularly in terms of understanding. And then the second thing is that we have to have strengthened the communications. So the very fact that during the visit, the two governments agreed to strengthen the high-level interactions is very much important. And also, I think we have to have shown some pragmatism. Some of the issues, some of the differences are going to stay, and we have to very well manage them. And in the meantime, I think we should not let these differences and the problems that affect the overall relationship, which is very much more important, and there are much areas for cooperation.
Rongying from the China Institute of International Studies, Richard White, Senior Fellow at the Hudson Institute in Washington, and not last but least, but Mohan Guruzami from the Center for Policy Alternatives over in New Delhi. Thank you very much for being here on this show.